All right, so we're speaking about land as an asset. We've also got a conversation lined up that will help you understand the legal nature of buying land. What are the factors that you need to bear in mind? My guest is Ravindra Pai, the Managing Director of Century Real Estate Holdings. Thank you so much, Ravi, for taking the time. Now, I do want to understand from a legal standpoint, what are the different types of agreements that one can get into when it comes to land?
Thank you for having me on the show, Alex. Land, as most of us know, is one of the most complex decisions to be taken. It's also possibly the most expensive purchase that somebody makes in their lifetime. Now, there are many things that you need to sort of be careful about when you buy land. First thing that we need to keep in mind is the title of the property. And again, I mean, for different asset classes, I mean, if it's a raw land, what you need to look for is something else. If it's plotted development in a gated community, the documents that you would look for would be something else. And if it's an apartment complex or a commercial building, the documents that you would look for would be something else. Coming to the primary raw land that when you're looking to buy, what we really need to keep in mind is to see whether the title of the property is clear. And this sometimes goes back to as long as 30 years, because as per the Limitation Act, for any private property, we need to at least have a title of 30 years. I mean, many advocates would like to go back to even 60, 70 years sometimes. But the title documents are very, very critical. Understand how the property has flown from the previous owners. It could be ancestral land, it could be grant lands. If it is a granted land, then, certain further complications come in place. We got to check whether there are certain restrictions from the government for sale. What were the conditions under which the grants have taken place? I mean, there are a lot of things that needs to be taken care of, and I would advise that I think it's best that we go to a reputable lawyer to get a title check done prior to purchasing the land. And given that the purchase itself is so expensive, I think the money spent on the lawyer would be well worth it.
That's fair enough. But just so that we're discussing, it also helps while you take professional help, Ravi, it helps to know what you're also asking about, right? So having said that, the different types of land that you mentioned, you didn't mention agricultural land as a different subset. Is there a different set of rules that governs agricultural land?
Yes, absolutely, Alex. In fact, the rules again differ from state to state. I can talk for the state of Karnataka, where all lands by default are agricultural lands. So what typically happens is that after you've sort of ascertained the title of the property, the next thing that you would really want to do is that to see if the land, what zone it is in. Typically, in any city or a municipality, there'll be something called a comprehensive development plan, which earmarks the use of each land for a specific purpose. So if it is in green zone, it would typically be agricultural land or used only for parks and open spaces. If it is yellow, it can be used for residential purpose. If it is blue, it can be used for commercial purpose. And if it is purple, it can be used for industrial purpose. So once, you sort of ascertain the title, and then if you want to buy a particular piece of land, typically I would advise that land would be converted from a non-agricultural purpose. I mean, until recently in Karnataka, a non-agriculturalist could not buy agricultural land. So what had to actually happen was that a process of conversion needed to take place when the land changes its nature from an agricultural land to non-agricultural sort of a status. And this is a process called conversion. And if you want to change the zone of the land, for example, I'm buying a piece of land in a yellow zone, but I want to use for commercial purposes, then there is a step called a change of land use, which is slightly more complicated. You need to write to the urban local bodies, the ULB in the city, and seek for the change of land use. Whereas the conversion would be a more or less an automatic process. I mean, there are certain documentation that is involved. The change of land use would be a little bit more complicated in that sense.
Can anyone go and buy agricultural land, or do you need to have some sort of certification that says that you are indeed a farmer?
Well, like I mentioned, this rule changes from state to state. In Karnataka, up until about a year back, you need to necessarily have been an agriculturalist to buy an agricultural land. And this was defined in terms of what an agricultural meant. You had to have either ancestral land, which was agricultural, or you need to have a particular ceiling beyond which your income, or rather income ceiling needed to be beyond a set limit. I think it was about 20 lakhs in Karnataka. So there were restrictions, and there was a particular act called 79AB in the revenue records, by which it prohibited non-agriculturalists to buy agricultural land. Now, this act has been amended about a year back, and today any individual or a company can buy an agricultural land without any need for any certification or without any sort of a ceiling restriction or any such thing.
Okay. Are you aware, Ravi, of leases being given for residential purposes even today? Not too long back on the show, we had discussed collector passing properties or B1 properties as they are called, and they are, I think, primarily in Mumbai and NCR. Are you aware of those leases going out even today?
No, like I mentioned, Alex, I mean, these regulations tend to change from state to state. I've not heard of anything like this in Karnataka. Typically, in Karnataka, what we have seen is that lands have been granted by the government, and these typically have a restriction of about 15 years before it can be sold. Besides that, I mean, lease is, to be honest, not very popular.
Right.
Only in the industrial area, sometimes you're like, when a KIDB allots land, these are typically for a tenure of about 99 years or so. So there the lease kicks in, but otherwise, I've not really come across too much about land being leased in Karnataka.
Understood. Now, you've already spoken about some of the documentation that you need, but the other thing that you need to bear in mind, and I think you pointed this out in a note or a report that you've written also, is the threat, if you are not living on the plot of land that you plan to acquire, of encroachment. Is there anything that you can do from a legal standpoint that can safeguard you? How should your approach be?
Well, it's a very, very good point that you raise, Alex. I mean, what we spoke so far was maybe the theoretical aspect of it. When it comes to the practical aspects of it, my advice would really be, or I mean, how we go about when we acquire land is primarily two sort of rules of thumb. The first thing that we do is get the land surveyed, and we get a fence put across the property. I mean, we would prefer it to be a sort of a permanent compound wall. I mean, it's worth the spend, really. I mean, I can assure you, I mean, it's worth spending the money and sort of putting a compound around the property. And what we would really do is that even before we sort of really transact with the property, we put a board stating that so-and-so is the owner of the property. Typically, we have seen out from experience is that the minute you enter some land, you would think that this is in the middle of nowhere, no one has a claim over this, everything seems hunky-dory. But the minute you sort of put a spade to the ground, minute you sort of start digging for a compound wall, or minute you start putting a board, rest assured that if there are any claims on the property, people will come there. The other good thing to really do is to maybe even put a public notice in all the leading dailies calling for objections. I think if you do these 2 or 3 things, you can pretty much be sure that there are no sort of really threat of any encroachment or any other claims or encumbrances that may arise once you transact with the property. So these typically, we sort of put it as a CP, which is a condition precedent for the transaction to be completed.
Would you say that when it comes to land purchases, and this is vis-a-vis when you buy an apartment in a building that is established, you go through the normal route, right, in a city or in most areas, right? Buying land is more fraught with the threat of a legal issue down the road, or do you think that is overstretching it?
No, absolutely. I think the risks are definitely more, and that's where I think players like land aggregators, players like builders come into play. Because what really happens is that from an agricultural status, the land goes through several iterative sort of process before it can be developed. So when you really are purchasing an apartment, you have the cover of, let's say, approvals. Government authorities have sanctioned the property, conversions have taken place, zone is sort of determined. RERAs have, RERA has today approved the property. So, I mean, several levels of risk or several layers of risk have already been mitigated. So obviously, it's far better to sort of get in at a stage when, a developer has sort of really put up a sanctioned sort of a plotted or a gated community or an apartment complex, rather than just going and scouting and buying a piece of land.
Now, the last thing that I want to ask is, in the case of ancestral properties or properties, or rather land that is going from generation to generation, is it absolutely essential to have a very clear will that ensures that the land then does not go into dispute? Or is there another mechanism where you can ensure that that something is done? Would you necessarily have to do the deed before and pass it on through a gift deed to the next generation so that there are no issues?
So in case of an ancestral land, Alex, what really happens is that every member of the family, of course, again, there are sort of the Hindu, HUF Act, then the Muslim, their act is separate. But what really happens is that in case of ancestral land, all the family members will have a claim. So what we typically do is that we ask for a family tree which has to be certified by the local sort of a tahsildar or a village accountant. So we know who all are the members of the family. In addition to sort of really putting, like I mentioned, the compound wall, the notice, the public notice, the board, having a certified copy of the family tree is very, very essential. And what we would like to do is that we would like every member of in the family tree to come and sort of be a part of the sale deed. So when the conveyance happens, all of them are joining the document. Of course, sometimes if they're not available, if sometimes they are outside, then they could possibly pass on a GPA or somebody to one of the family members who will release the sort of their right on behalf of the person who's not available. But it's highly advisable that you get everybody in the family tree to sort of join the sale deed, so that we don't leave out any particular share, because then tomorrow there could be claims from some of these missing members going forward.
Closing words then, Ravi. In conversations that we've had in the recent past, a lot of people are talking about real estate land coming back in a big way. People are saying they're a little risk off when it comes to equity and perhaps thinking of buying land. Do you think now is a good time?
Well, Alex, post-pandemic, surprisingly, not what we all expected, but the markets have really been doing very well. I really think that we've had maybe a run of 10 years where real estate has not seen any real appreciation. And today, given that the home loans are at its lowest, equity markets, I would think, are possibly frothy. Gold also is possibly at one of its all-time high. I would think that real estate would be a really good bet for somebody to sort of enter at this point of time. And we are seeing that happen. A lot of people pre-pandemic were on the fence. I think they are sort of jumping over to the side of real estate at this point of time. And I just hope that this run continues for a few more years going forward.
Ravi, absolute pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for joining in and look forward to speaking to you in the near future.
Thank you for having me on the show, Alex. It's been a pleasure chatting with you.